I hope by now there are two things that you've realized. Number one, I'm not Pastor Jessie. She's on a well-deserved vacation this past weekend today. And secondly, it's obvious by now that we're concerned with the Good Shepherd, because we've heard a lot about the Good Shepherd in our readings, in our prayers, in our call to worship. So let us listen with attentive ears to the gospel for this Good Shepherd Sunday, the fourth Sunday of Easter, in the 10th chapter of the gospel according to John, beginning at the first verse. And Jesus is talking to those around him, including Pharisees and Sadducees. Very truly, I tell you, he says, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. This is the word of the Lord. Question. Now be honest. I'm asking a question, be honest. How many of you were alive in 1946? Don't make believe that you're younger than you are. Okay. Well, we may not remember exactly, but there was a movie that came out that year about a man who had lived his life in a small town, but he longed to shake the dust out of the place and get to explore the world. But circumstances kept him there, and then one Christmas Eve, he had a soul-crushing crisis of the spirit, and he thinks about throwing himself off of a bridge, but an angel intervenes to show him what a world would be like without him. And it's not a pretty picture. And soon he discovers what life is all about. Does anybody remember the name of that movie? It's A Wonderful Life. Now, you may not have seen it when it came out. You may not have been born, but it's been shown each holiday season on television for the past 40 years. So maybe some of you who are younger have seen it. And today, I want to ask you this question. What kind of life do you want? How would you fill in the blank? Life is, well, Forrest Gump, if you remember in the movie, filled in the blank by saying, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. And of course, if he lived in Findlay, he would have said, life is like a box of Deed says chocolates. Of course. F. Scott Peck, who is the well-read physician author, began his best-selling book, The Road Less Traveled, by writing, life is difficult. 30 years ago, while I was serving a church in Southern California, I went to a timeshare sales meeting. And the salesman, in one last effort to get those present to sign on the dotted line, said, life is not a dress rehearsal. You only get to live it once. Others have described our existence by filling in the blank with, life is a rat race. Life is like a bowl of cherries. Life is a series of choices. Life is a paycheck. Life is a weekend party. Why is it that we always want to reduce life in size? For many people today, life is nothing more than the time they spend between birth and death. The drudgery of existence, the boring monotony of routine, the hope of having enough to exist until the grim reaper appears. And I often ask myself, have people like this bought themselves a lie? Has their life been stolen from them? Jesus was always fond of drawing stories from familiar scenes. You've heard many of them. Here in this 10th chapter of the Gospel of John, he uses a familiar scene of shepherds keeping watch over the sheep. And he said, a thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. The job of the shepherd was to lead, to protect, to find food for the sheep. But thieves would always find ways of taking that livelihood away from the Jewish shepherds. Now, you and I are not familiar in a culture in which we live with sheep. Maybe a few were raised on farms where there were sheep, but not too many people are familiar with shepherds. And you can understand that for us, likewise, there are many ways that we can travel the road of life that lead not to the abundant life, but to destruction. Over the years in ministry, I've heard people say, well, if only I could take a 2-month cruise around the world. Oh, that would be really living. Oh, if I could just retire in some luxurious condo someplace. Oh, if I could only have all of my fantasies fulfilled. That would be really living. But what kind of life is it? Many people have done these things and continue to do these things, and yet they're still empty. No, you don't find abundant life in pleasures. Then there's that myth that circulated for years that says success produces abundant life. Workaholics eventually learned that the satisfaction of one job completed is short-lived. The thrill of victory lasts about 15 minutes, and some people are happy with those short 15 minutes of fame, but what kind of life is it? You don't find an abundant life in performance, in doing things. Some people find life in possessions. And the more possessions they have, the happier they think they're going to be. But what kind of life is that? Remember, Jesus told the parable about the man who said, I'm going to build more barns to store all my goods, only to have them taken away in an instant. No, you don't find an abundant life in possessions. Too often people think that if they receive a certain promotion in their job, or they reach a certain status in life, or they live in a certain kind of community, or belong to the certain country club, or get a huge inheritance, then they're going to be really happy. But what kind of life is it if you never find the secret of a fulfilling life? No, you don't find an abundant life in position either. Some people think that if they stay busy enough their whole life with the job and then in retirement, and if their pace of life remains intense, then they're going to really discover what life is all about, and yet all they find is stress and ulcers and heart attacks. You never find an abundant life in pursuits. So there you have for us in our day the thieves that masquerade as givers of life, pleasures, performance, positions, pursuits, but they're actually dispensers of destruction and disease and death. The truth is that an abundant life is not found in those things. An abundant life is found in the person of Jesus Christ, as he says here in this gospel. He is the good shepherd, the giver, and the author of how to live a better life. In other chapters in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. And later in the same gospel, Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. But the most powerful statement Jesus says regarding life is in this gospel text. I have come that they may have life and have it in abundance. I love the way Eugene Peterson, who is the man who, for contemporary times, has written The Message, which is a translation of the Bible. He says in there, I came so that they may have a more and better life than they ever dreamed of. And we know, as followers of Jesus Christ, that that's where the life is that we need to look for. For us to understand how that kind of life is entered, we have to realize that there's a special relationship that exists between a shepherd and a sheep. When Jesus says, I am the gate for the sheep, that sounds kind of strange for us, doesn't it? Stretches our imagination to think that someone can act as a gate. But that's just what a good shepherd does, particularly the ones that are devoted entirely to keeping their sheep. For the first time I visited the Holy Land back in the 1970s, I was with a tour group, and the guide took us to a place where there was a sheepfold. And I said to the shepherd, is that where you go at night with the sheep? And he said, yes. And when they're in there with me, they're perfectly safe. But I said, there's no gate. And he said, I am the gate. When the sun sets and all the sheep are inside, I lie down in that open space, and no sheep ever go out except over me, and no thieves or animals that will destroy, no wolves come in unless it crosses my body, because I'm the gate. So when Jesus says, I am the gate, he means that the sheepfold that we are in has one entrance and exit. For those of us who are disciples of Jesus Christ, life has one source, one spiritual nourishment, And the single means of access to all that is an abundant life in him. Now, some of you will say to me, well, wait a minute, preacher. Don't I already have life? Am I not breathing? Isn't my heart pumping? And the answer is yes. But not the kind of life that Jesus is talking about. As I said with the children, when we were born, we were given a biological life. But when we were baptized, we were born anew, given a life that belongs to God. And when you and I enter a relationship with God through Jesus, we're not only physically alive, but we're alive in the Spirit also, alive to what Jesus tells us to do with our life in relationship to God and to other human beings. We often imagine that, yes, we have a full life. We have an abundant life. Oh, we're so smart. We're so strong. We're so successful. But face to face with Jesus, we find that maybe we've made a little too much of ourselves. The truth is, all of us are in desperate need of God's grace. The good news is that abundant life is available in Jesus Christ. And so, as his beloved community, the church, in service to others of that abundant life for all of God's creation, that's ours. That's ours to build up and to live it. And no matter what happens around us, no matter how bad the world outside looks, no matter how difficult life can be even for those inside, we must believe, of all people in the world, that the abundant life that Jesus gives, not death and destruction that we're so familiar with every day, that abundant life is the last word against all evidence to the contrary. All our efforts to live the good news in the world, we must believe will not be defeated. And the source and the power of that universe is on the side of life and its fulfillment. And in this Easter season, the risen Christ for us is the Christian way of speaking of that faith and that hope. God is offering not only to us, but to all people, life. Not just a good life, not just a happy life, but a better life than we ever dreamed of. And to that, we all should say, Amen.